Listen to me very carefully. You must stay calm and return to your seats right now.
The morning sun filtered through the enormous windows of Los Angeles International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished terminal floors. It was a Tuesday in July, one of those perfectly California days where the sky was so blue it almost looked fake. Marcus and Jennifer Chen stood at Gate 47, their small forms dwarfed by the immensity of the airport around them. They were 8 years old, fraternal twins with their mother's dark eyes and their father's determined jawline. Marcus was slightly taller, with a mischievous grin that had gotten him into trouble countless times at school. Jennifer was more reserved, thoughtful, the kind of child who noticed things, like the nervous way her twin brother kept bouncing on his heels, or how their father's smile didn't quite reach his eyes this morning. This was a monumental day for the Chen household. For the first time in their lives, Marcus and Jennifer were flying alone. Well, not entirely alone, but without their parents. They were traveling to New York to spend 6 weeks with their paternal grandparents, who had been begging to spend quality time with them. Their father, David Chen, had orchestrated this journey with the same meticulous precision he applied to his $40 billion tech company. Every detail had been planned, researched, and executed with military-like efficiency. He'd purchased tickets on United Airlines specifically because their unaccompanied minor program had the highest safety ratings. He'd booked seats in the first row of the main cabin so flight attendants could easily monitor them. He'd even briefed the airline in advance about the children's presence. David knelt down to eye level with his children, his expensive Armani suit crinkling slightly as he bent. His face, usually hard and businesslike during board meetings, softened with paternal tenderness. He was a man accustomed to controlling outcomes, predicting market trends, and managing hundreds of millions of dollars. But right now, looking at his twin children about to board a cross-country flight without him, he felt completely vulnerable. That vulnerability terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever could. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice gentle but serious. "You're going to be brave today, both of you. You're going to listen to the flight attendants, follow every instruction they give you, and treat them with respect. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded eagerly, his adventurous spirit already imagining the clouds he'd see from the window seat. Jennifer's response was slower, more contemplative. She reached out and adjusted her father's tie, a gesture so unexpectedly mature that David felt his throat tighten. "Will we be okay, Daddy?" Jennifer asked, her voice smaller than usual. It wasn't a question about safety in the technical sense. She knew statistics. She'd overheard her father discussing the accident rates with her mother. It was something deeper, something about the emotional weight of this separation, the unknown territory of traveling without their parents as safety nets. David pulled both children into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of their apple-scented shampoo. "You'll be more than okay," he whispered. "You're Chen children. You're resilient, you're intelligent, and you take care of each other. That's all you need to remember." He pulled back and kissed each of their foreheads. "And Jennifer, thank you for taking care of your brother. I'm counting on you." A few minutes later, an airline representative approached them, a woman in her 30s with a professional smile and a clipboard. "Mr. Chen, I'm Sarah from our unaccompanied minor program. I'll be checking in with Marcus and Jennifer periodically throughout the flight." David shook her hand firmly, his eyes searching hers for any sign of carelessness or incompetence. He found none. The woman seemed genuinely caring, genuinely invested in the children's well-being. He felt marginally better. As the children were prepared for boarding, red tags were fastened around their wrists, special identification that marked them as minors traveling without guardians. Marcus thought the tags were cool, like they were secret agents on a covert mission. Jennifer found them slightly humiliating, these visible markers of their vulnerability. Other passengers would see those tags and know immediately that they were alone. The moment came. The final boarding call was announced. David walked them to the gate agent, knelt down one final time. "I love you both more than anything," he said. I'll be waiting in New York and Grandma and Grandpa are going to spoil you rotten. Call me as soon as you land." Marcus grinned and hugged his father fiercely. "We love you too, Dad." Jennifer hugged him longer, holding on just a fraction too long, as if she could somehow imprint this moment, this safety, into her memory forever. When she finally pulled away, she had tears in her eyes that she blinked away quickly, determined to be brave. David watched them walk down the jet bridge, their small forms growing smaller until they disappeared. He stood there for a full minute, something his board of directors would have found shocking. David Chen, the man who juggled billion-dollar decisions like a master conductor, frozen by the image of his children walking away from him. Then he turned and walked back through the terminal, already mentally running through work emails he could process during the wait. Inside the aircraft, the twins found their seats in 1B and 1C. The plane was massive, a Boeing 787 with that new plane smell and pristine upholstery. Everything seemed huge from their 8-year-old perspective. The overhead compartments towered above them. The galley stretched into what seemed like infinity. The cockpit door, sealed and mysterious, fascinated Marcus immediately. As they settled into their seats, fastening seatbelts under Sarah's gentle supervision, the flight attendants began their pre-flight preparations. Most of them were professional, kind, moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency. But one woman caught Jennifer's attention, Patricia Wells, whose name tag identified her as the senior flight attendant on this flight. She was moving through the aircraft with an efficiency that bordered on aggression, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting, straightening things that were already straight. When Patricia's eyes fell upon the twins, something flickered across her face. It was subtle, just a slight tightening of her jaw, a barely perceptible narrowing of her eyes, but Jennifer felt it like a physical touch. It was the look of someone who saw a problem, an inconvenience, a disruption to her routine. Patricia was 58 years old and had been flying for 33 years. She'd seen thousands of passengers, hundreds of unaccompanied minors, and in her personal ranking system, children were somewhere between carry-on luggage and complaints. She believed in the old-school way of handling minors on planes: minimal interaction, firm boundaries, no exceptions. She'd never understood why airlines had expanded their unaccompanied minor programs. In her day, children just flew with a note pinned to their shirt, and that was that. As Patricia walked past the twins' seats toward the front galley, she glanced back at them one more time. Marcus was pressing his face against the window, mesmerized by the airport activity below. Jennifer was sitting primly, hands folded in her lap, watching Patricia with an intensity that made the flight attendant feel evaluated, judged. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. It was going to be a long 6 hours. By hour 3 of the 6-hour flight, the atmosphere around seats 1B and 1C had become suffocating. Jennifer's hand remained clasped in Marcus's, neither child willing to release that physical connection to the other. Marcus had stopped looking out the window. He'd moved past excitement and was now firmly in the territory of genuine distress. His bladder was screaming for attention. He'd been holding it for an hour, terrified to ask Patricia for anything after witnessing Jennifer's rebuke. "Jennifer," he whispered, "I really need to go to the bathroom." Jennifer bit her lip. She knew this was dangerous territory, but she also knew her brother couldn't wait indefinitely. "Okay," she whispered back, "just be very polite. Don't give her any reason to be upset." Marcus gathered his courage, unbuckled his seatbelt quietly, and raised his hand. Patricia was in the forward galley, organizing beverage carts with aggressive efficiency. It took her 2 full minutes to notice him, and during those 2 minutes, Marcus felt his anxiety spiral. His hand began to shake. His need became more urgent. When Patricia finally looked up, Marcus managed a weak smile. Miss Patricia, could I please use the restroom?" Patricia's eyes narrowed. She glanced at her watch, a deliberate theatrical gesture that made it clear she was inconvenienced by his very existence. "The restroom? Now, we're in the middle of beverage service." I'm sorry, I just really need to. You'll wait, Patricia said flatly, turning back to her work. I don't have time to supervise bathroom breaks right now. Come back in 20 minutes. 20 minutes might as well have been an eternity to an 8-year-old with a full bladder. Marcus returned to his seat, his face burning with humiliation and desperation. Jennifer immediately knew something was wrong. She watched her brother squirm, watched him cross his legs, watched the physical manifestation of distress ripple across his small body. She said to wait, Marcus whispered, and Jennifer's hands clenched into fists. The injustice of it, the casual cruelty masked as authority, enraged her. But what could she do? Patricia was the adult. Patricia had power. Adults had always told them to listen to adults, to respect authority, to follow instructions. Now that authority was being weaponized against them. 15 minutes later, Marcus couldn't wait anymore. He raised his hand again, desperation overriding his fear. When Patricia finally acknowledged him, he was almost in tears. I really need to go now, he said, his voice shaking. Patricia sighed dramatically as if he'd asked her to move a mountain. Fine, but be quick about it, and don't touch anything in there. The restroom on an airplane is approximately 4 by 3 feet, a confined space that feels like a coffin when you're a traumatized 8-year-old. Marcus did his business as quickly as he could, washed his hands in the tiny sink, and tried to compose himself in the mirror. His face was pale, blotchy with stress. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like a child who'd been crying, even though he hadn't yet, not quite. When he returned to his seat, he found Patricia standing in the aisle talking to one of the other flight attendants, a woman named Carol. Patricia was gesturing in their direction, and though her voice was low, the disdain was audible. Those two have been nothing but problems since we took off, Patricia was saying. Constant demands, needy. Their father probably spoiled them rotten. Carol looked uncomfortable. She glanced toward the twins, caught Marcus's eye, and offered him a weak, apologetic smile. But she didn't say anything. She didn't defend them. She simply walked away, clearly not wanting to engage in this conversation. The message was clear to both children. The adults were aligned against them. There was no one to advocate for them. There was no one who would step in. Around hour 4, the meal service began. The flight attendants, Patricia leading the charge, moved through the cabin with their carts, offering passengers choices between chicken, pasta, or fish. Marcus watched the cart approach their row. His stomach was gurgling audibly from hunger and stress. Jennifer was watching Patricia with intense focus, trying to gauge her mood, trying to figure out how to navigate this next interaction. Patricia rolled the cart to their row and began serving the passengers around them. In row 2, she asked a businessman what he'd prefer. In row 3, she smiled, actually smiled, at an elderly couple and offered them wine. But when she reached the twins' seats, she rolled right past them. Wait, Miss Patricia, Jennifer called out, her voice small but determined. Could we have some food, please? Patricia turned back slowly, deliberately. Her expression was as cold as a winter storm. Did you ask properly? She asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Yes, we just asked if we could have some food, Jennifer stammered, suddenly uncertain what properly meant. That's not asking properly, Patricia said flatly. You need to look at the menu, select what you want, and ask in a respectful manner. Since you didn't bother to do that, the food service has moved on. Maybe you'll catch the next one. She rolled the cart forward, leaving the twins staring at her retreating back, their stomachs empty, their shame compounding with each passing minute. Around them, passengers were eating, the smell of food wafting through the cabin, creating an almost cruel reminder of their exclusion. A woman 2 rows back, the elderly grandmother who'd been watching the twins the entire flight, shook her head with visible anger. A young father across the aisle actually called out, "Excuse me, miss. Those children didn't get food." Patricia turned with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. The children need to learn how to properly request assistance. We have standards on this airline. The lie was so blatant, so obviously untrue, that the man seemed momentarily speechless. He looked at Marcus and Jennifer with genuine sympathy, then seemed to realize there was nothing he could do without escalating the situation further. Jennifer put her hand on Marcus's arm as he began to shake. She squeezed gently, a silent communication between twins. Stay calm. Don't provoke her. Survive this. By hour 5, both children were running on fumes, emotional, physical, and psychological fumes. Marcus had developed a tremor in his hands. Jennifer's skin had taken on a waxy, too pale quality. They'd stopped talking entirely, communicating only through hand squeezes and meaningful glances. The physical effects of stress and deprivation were beginning to accumulate in their small bodies. Around them, the cabin had become a strange mix of normalcy and tension. Most passengers were sleeping or reading, oblivious to the psychological torture occurring in the front row. But those who noticed, and there were quite a few, watched with growing alarm. The grandmother had actually taken out her phone and was filming something, her expression grim and determined. Several passengers were having quiet conversations about what they were witnessing, their voices low but their disapproval palpable. Patricia seemed emboldened by the discomfort she was causing. She made a point of walking past the twins' seats frequently, her presence a constant reminder of her control, her authority, her absolute power over their comfort and well-being. When Marcus accidentally made eye contact with her during one of these passes, she leaned down slightly and whispered something that only he could hear. "You better not cause any problems on this flight, or you'll regret it." The threat, however vague, was terrifying to an 8-year-old. Marcus felt his chest tighten with panic. Jennifer, seeing her brother's reaction, began to worry that he was approaching some kind of breaking point, though she had no way of knowing how prescient that worry actually was. The plane still had over an hour to go. The twins had no idea what was coming. They only knew that they were trapped in a metal tube at 35,000 feet with a woman who seemed to hate them, far from anyone who could help, far from the safety of their father's protection. What neither child could predict was just how much worse this was about to become. Hour 5 arrived with a suffocating heaviness. The cabin had dimmed, most passengers having surrendered to sleep or exhaustion. But in seats 1B and 1C, there was no rest. Marcus's breathing had become increasingly shallow. His skin had taken on a grayish undertone. Jennifer, ever the protector, had her arm around her brother's shoulders, though she herself was barely holding together. The stress hormones flooding their small bodies had been running unchecked for hours. Adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, all the chemicals designed for short-term survival, but devastating when sustained in a child's system. The temperature in the cabin felt normal to other passengers, but to the twins, it seemed to fluctuate wildly. One moment they were freezing, the next burning up. Neither had had water in over an hour. Neither had eaten anything since breakfast, which felt like it had happened in another lifetime. The dehydration was progressing silently, invisibly, but with devastating effect. Their lips were dry and pale. Their eyes had lost some of their brightness. The small amount of saliva in their mouths felt thick and cottony. Marcus suddenly gripped Jennifer's hand with surprising strength. "I don't feel good," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Jennifer leaned close, her 8-year-old face creased with worry. "What's wrong? What hurts?" "Everything," Marcus said, and his voice cracked. "I feel dizzy, and my chest is weird, like I can't breathe right." What Marcus was experiencing was a panic attack, something he had no vocabulary for, no framework to understand. His heart was racing at a dangerous pace. His breathing had become rapid and shallow. His muscles were tense and trembling. All of it compounded the physical dehydration, creating a perfect storm of physiological distress in his small body. Jennifer did the only thing she could think of. She held her brother tighter and whispered the things her mother had whispered to them when they'd had nightmares. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm right here. Just breathe. In and out. In and out." But Jennifer herself was reaching the limits of her own capacity to cope. The stress of protecting her brother, combined with her own physiological deterioration, was pushing her toward her own breaking point. She began to experience something she'd never felt before, a strange disconnection from her body, as if she were watching herself from outside herself. The medical term for this was depersonalization, a dissociative response to extreme stress, but Jennifer knew nothing of terms and diagnoses. She only knew that reality felt strange and distant, as if she were moving through a dream. Patricia walked past their seats at approximately the 4:47 mark in the flight. She glanced at the twins, at Marcus's pallid face and rapid breathing, at Jennifer's glazed expression, and something flickered across her own face. Not concern, not empathy, merely irritation at the realization that the children looked ill, and illness on an airplane meant paperwork and responsibility. "Stop looking so pathetic," she muttered as she passed, quiet enough that no one else could hear clearly. Those words, spoken with such casual cruelty to children already broken and desperate, seemed to constitute some sort of final straw. Jennifer felt something inside her snap, not in a violent way, but in the way an overtaxed system simply ceases to function. Her breathing became even shallower. Her vision began to tunnel. The rational part of her brain that had been fighting so hard to keep both of them together to survive this nightmare suddenly went quiet. Marcus noticed first. He felt his sister's arm going slack around his shoulders. He turned to look at her and watched in horror as her head tilted slowly backward, her eyes fluttering closed, her entire body going limp like a marionette with cut strings. "Jennifer, Jennifer, Jennifer," Marcus screamed, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the cabin like a knife. Heads snapped up throughout the aircraft. The grandmother in 2D immediately unbuckled her seatbelt and moved toward the twins, her 73-year-old frame moving faster than it had in years. A doctor who had been reading in 3C stood up immediately, medical instinct overriding everything else. For a moment, there was absolute confusion. Then panic began to ripple through the cabin. Marcus, watching his twin sister, his other half, his constant companion, his partner in survival, completely unresponsive, felt something inside him fracture. His breathing became erratic, moving from rapid to impossibly fast. He was hyperventilating, the bags under his eyes seeming to deepen as he gasped for air that he couldn't process fast enough. "Someone help my sister," he cried out, reaching for Jennifer's limp hand, checking to see if she was breathing. She was barely, her breath so shallow it was almost imperceptible. The grandmother, whose name was Ruth Chen and whose own grandchildren never visited her, cradled Jennifer's head gently. She felt for a pulse at the child's neck and found one, though it was rapid and thready. "She's alive, sweetheart, she's alive," Ruth said to Marcus, though she had no idea if she was telling the truth or simply comforting a terrified child. She looked around desperately. "Is there a doctor, a nurse, anyone?" The doctor from 3C was already there, checking Jennifer's pupils, her airway, her responsiveness. "She's unconscious," he said, his voice clinical but not unkind. "Someone call the flight crew, now." Patricia, who had been in the rear galley when the commotion started, came running forward with the other flight attendants. The moment she saw Jennifer's limp form and Marcus's panic, her face went completely white. The color drained so thoroughly that she looked like a ghost wearing a flight attendant uniform. But there was no time for her reaction. The captain had been alerted. His voice came over the intercom, calm and authoritative. "We have a medical emergency. Flight attendants, secure the cabin. We're diverting to Denver International. Stand by." The cabin suddenly became a scene of controlled chaos. Passengers were told to remain seated. The doctor continued to assess Jennifer while encouraging Marcus to breathe slowly to try to calm himself. But Marcus couldn't calm himself. His sister was unconscious. His panic was absolute. Then, as if in slow motion, Marcus felt the world begin to spin. His vision blackened at the edges. He couldn't get enough air into his lungs no matter how hard he tried to breathe. His heart felt like it was going to explode out of his chest. Everything became too much, too overwhelming, too terrifying. He looked at his sister one more time, her small face peaceful but frighteningly still, and then his own eyes rolled back. His body went rigid for just a moment, then limp. Both twins were now unconscious. Both were unresponsive. Both were, from the perspective of panicked passengers and emergency personnel, in critical condition. The cabin erupted into full emergency response. Multiple passengers were filming on their phones. The doctor was performing emergency assessment on both children. Flight attendants were running through their emergency protocols with shaking hands. And Patricia Wells stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth, finally understanding, finally truly understanding what she had done. The pilot's voice came through the intercom again, this time more urgent. "Buckle up, everyone. We're making an emergency descent to Denver International Airport. Medical personnel will be waiting on the tarmac. This is not a drill." The Boeing 787 banked sharply, beginning its emergency descent from 35,000 feet. Through the windows, the sky outside seemed to dim as if matching the horror inside the cabin. Both children, lying unconscious and unresponsive, had no idea how close they'd come to something far worse than mistreatment. They'd come to actual physical failure, the body's ultimate response to unbearable stress and deprivation. And it was all because one woman had decided that her comfort was more important than the basic human dignity of two innocent children. The landing in Denver was textbook perfect from a piloting perspective, smooth, controlled, professional. But from the perspective of the two unconscious children strapped to seats in the first-class cabin, it was a blur of sensation and nothing else. Emergency vehicles were already waiting on the tarmac, their lights painting the aircraft in strobes of red and white. Paramedics boarded before the aircraft had even fully taxied to the gate. Both Marcus and Jennifer were loaded into separate ambulances with practiced efficiency. The paramedics worked with quiet competence, checking vitals, starting IVs, radioing ahead to Denver Children's Hospital. Marcus regained partial consciousness during transport, his eyes fluttering open for brief moments before slipping closed again. Jennifer remained deeply unconscious, her small body monitored continuously by sophisticated equipment designed to keep people alive. At Denver Children's Hospital, the twins were rushed to the pediatric emergency department. Dr. Sarah Mendez, a pediatrician with 15 years of experience in trauma and stress-related conditions, took one look at both children and immediately ordered comprehensive testing. Blood work, EKGs, comprehensive metabolic panels, the full battery of tests designed to understand what had happened to these two children. The results came back within 2 hours. Both children were severely dehydrated, their electrolytes dangerously imbalanced. Both showed signs of extreme stress, elevated cortisol levels that indicated they'd been in fight-or-flight mode for an extended period. Both showed signs of acute stress reaction, a legitimate medical condition triggered by exposure to traumatic stress. There was no permanent physical damage, but the psychological trauma was evident in their vital signs, in their medical markers, in the very fabric of their physiological responses. By evening, both children had regained consciousness. They were kept under observation, IV fluids continuing to replenish their depleted systems. Marcus woke first, confusion clouding his features as he tried to understand where he was, why there were tubes in his arm, why the ceiling wasn't the familiar one from his childhood bedroom. Jennifer woke an hour later, her first instinct to search for her brother. When she spotted him in the adjacent bed, tears began streaming down her face, tears of relief, tears of trauma, tears of survival. Hospital staff moved gently around them, checking on them frequently, their expressions carefully arranged to hide the anger many of them felt. The story of what had happened on that flight was spreading through the hospital like wildfire. The flight attendants' cruelty, the twins' mistreatment, the emergency landing, all of it was becoming staff room gossip, becoming a case study in what happened when adults failed to protect children. Dr. Mendez conducted gentle interviews with both children, trained to extract information without further traumatizing them. Marcus told her about the refusal of water, about the bathroom denial, about the missed meals. Jennifer, more articulate despite her trauma, provided a more detailed account. The threats, the public humiliation, the ways Patricia had systematically denied them basic human needs. The medical team documented everything meticulously, creating a detailed record of child neglect and psychological abuse. By 9 p.m. that evening, the hospital's patient advocate, a woman named Linda Torres, made the call that would change everything. She dialed the number listed as emergency contact, David Chen's private line. David was in his office in Los Angeles, reviewing quarterly reports when his private phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He was deep in work, and his assistant was supposed to screen these calls. But something made him pick up. It was always something, that inexplicable instinct that tells a father something is wrong with his children even across hundreds of miles. "Mr. Chen," a calm, professional voice said, "this is Linda Torres from Denver Children's Hospital. I'm calling about your children, Marcus and Jennifer." David's blood went cold. Everything else, the reports, the desk, the office, the company, simply ceased to exist. What happened? Are they alive? "Yes, they're alive and stable," Linda said quickly, understanding the fear in those 3 words. "They're both conscious. They're receiving excellent medical care. But Mr. Chen, there's been an incident. Your children were on United Airlines Flight 447 from Los Angeles this morning. During the flight, they experienced severe neglect and mistreatment by a member of the flight crew. They became dehydrated and experienced acute stress reactions, resulting in both children losing consciousness. The flight made an emergency, landing here in Denver." David felt the world tilt slightly. For a moment he couldn't process the words. His children, his twins, unconscious, emergency landing, flight crew. "Put them on the phone," he said, his voice suddenly sharp and clear, despite the adrenaline surge making everything feel surreal. "Of course, Jennifer is more alert right now. One moment." There was a rustling of movement, and then he heard his daughter's small voice, trembling but recognizable. "Daddy." That one word nearly broke him. He could hear everything in that word, the fear, the trauma, the relief at hearing his voice. "Jennifer, baby, are you okay? Where does it hurt?" "My head hurts a little bit and I'm really thirsty," she said, her voice small and young and heartbreaking. "Daddy, there was a lady on the plane. She was really mean to us. She wouldn't give us water or food and she said bad things," and her voice broke into a cry. David's hands were shaking. His jaw had clenched so tightly he thought his teeth might crack. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. You're safe now. I'm coming to get you. I'm coming right now." He hung up the phone and immediately dialed his executive assistant. "I need the jet ready in 30 minutes. Destination, Denver. I need a car to the airport immediately. Cancel everything on my schedule for the next week. I don't care what it is." "Right away, sir," came the response. Then he called his lawyer. "Get me everything on United Airlines unaccompanied minor protocols, Flight 447 from LAX to JFK today, emergency landing in Denver. Get me the names of all flight crew. Get me passenger manifests. Get me everything. And I want to know who the flight attendant was who mistreated my children." By the time David arrived at the airport, his phone had already provided him with a mountain of information. Patricia Wells, 58 years old, employed by United Airlines for 33 years, with a history of complaints. Not many, because most passengers didn't bother to file them, but enough to establish a pattern. His legal team was already building a case. The private jet pushed back from the tarmac at 11:47 p.m. Los Angeles time. David sat in the leather seat, his hands clenched into fists, his mind working through scenarios and consequences and accountability. He'd built his empire on one principle: consequences. Bad decisions had consequences. Failures had consequences. And cruelty, deliberate cruelty to innocent children, would have the most severe consequences he could possibly arrange. On his laptop, he watched the story beginning to explode on social media. Videos from passengers were surfacing. News outlets were starting to pick up the story. Flight attendant abuse was trending. The public was already beginning to form opinions, to demand accountability, to express outrage. David opened a secure messaging app and began communicating with his team of lawyers, publicists, and investigators. By the time he landed in Denver in 4 hours, he wanted every detail of Patricia Wells's conduct documented, every passenger statement collected, every moment of her cruelty on film if possible. The jet climbed to cruising altitude, and David stared out the window at the darkness below. Somewhere down there in Denver, his children were sleeping in hospital beds, recovering from trauma that he should have protected them from. And somewhere else, Patricia Wells was probably going about her evening, completely unaware that her life was about to be systematically dismantled by a man with unlimited resources and absolute determination. David Chen had built a multi-billion-dollar empire through focus and precision. Now he was going to apply those same skills to something far more personal, ensuring that the woman who hurt his children paid the full price for her actions. The automatic doors of Denver Children's Hospital's emergency entrance hissed open at 3:47 a.m. Mountain Time. David Chen stepped through like a man possessed, expensive suit wrinkled from the flight, tie loosened, hair disheveled, but his eyes sharp and focused with dangerous intensity. He moved through the corridors with absolute certainty, though he'd never been to this hospital before. A man like David Chen didn't need to ask for directions. He simply expected people to make way, and they did. At the pediatric ICU reception desk, a nurse recognized him immediately, not from hospital records but from the way he carried himself, from the aura of absolute authority that preceded him. His face had been in Forbes, in Business Insider, in countless tech publications. But what struck the nurse most was the raw emotion barely contained beneath his controlled exterior. A father in crisis, a billionaire reduced to his most fundamental human need, his children. "My children, Marcus and Jennifer Chen," he said, his voice clipped and precise despite the emotion beneath. "Room 412 and 415. I need to see them. Now." "Of course, Mr. Chen. Right this way," the nurse said, standing immediately despite her shift being long and exhausting. When he entered Jennifer's room first, he stopped in the doorway for just a moment. His 8-year-old daughter was lying in a hospital bed, looking impossibly small, impossibly fragile. An IV ran into her arm. Monitors tracked her vitals with soft beeps and gentle pulses of light. She was sleeping, but even in sleep, her face bore the traces of trauma, a slight tension around her eyes, her small hands clenched. David moved to her bedside with the care of a man handling something infinitely precious. He bent down and kissed her forehead, his lips lingering there as if he could transfer strength through that single touch. Tears, which he'd held back through the entire flight despite the rage burning in his chest, finally began to streak down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered to his unconscious daughter. "I'm so sorry, baby. That's never going to happen again, I promise you." He stayed there for 10 minutes, simply holding her small hand, watching her sleep, letting the full weight of what had happened crash over him in waves. Then he composed himself with visible effort, wiped his face, took a deep breath and moved to Marcus's room. Marcus was awake, staring at nothing in particular, his eyes hollow and exhausted. When he saw his father, his entire body seemed to collapse inward with relief. "Dad," he cried out, the single word containing all the fear and pain and longing of the past hours. David pulled his son into a careful embrace, mindful of the IV line. "I'm here, buddy. I'm here. You're safe now. Both of you are safe." "She wouldn't give us water, Dad," Marcus sobbed into his father's chest. "And we were so scared. Jennifer passed out and I couldn't wake her up in." I know, David said, his voice gentle despite the storm of fury beneath. "You did everything right. You took care of your sister. You were so brave. This wasn't your fault. None of this was your fault." They stayed like that for nearly half an hour, father and son, holding each other in the quiet hours of the early morning. But when David finally stepped back from his son, something shifted in his expression. The grief and paternal love were still there, but now they were joined by something else: cold, calculated determination. He kissed Marcus on the forehead. "Get some rest, okay? I'm going to be right here." Then David Chen left the room and became something different. Not less of a father, but more of something else entirely. A man with virtually unlimited resources, a network of powerful connections, and absolute resolve to ensure accountability. He found a quiet corner of the pediatric ward and made a series of phone calls. His lead attorney, Richard Hutchins, answered on the second ring despite the early hour. When your boss is David Chen, you keep your phone on at all times. "Richard, I need everything. Full investigation. I want Patricia Wells's employment history, every complaint filed against her, every interaction documented. I want passenger statements from today's flight. I want them all. I want video footage from the aircraft. I want medical records for both my children showing the effects of dehydration and stress trauma. I want expert testimony from pediatricians about what happens when children are denied basic necessities. And I want it all documented and organized within 48 hours." "Understood, sir. I'm mobilizing the team now," Richard said, his voice already shifting into full crisis mode. Next, David called his publicist, Miranda Chen, no relation though they joked about it. "Miranda, United Airlines Flight 447 is about to become a PR nightmare. My children were on that flight. They were mistreated by a flight attendant named Patricia Wells. They collapsed and required emergency landing. I want this story in every major news outlet by breakfast time. I want hashtags. I want public outrage. I want the entire nation to know what happened to my children." "Jesus, David, I'm so sorry. I'll get it organized immediately. This is already starting to trend on social media." "I know, accelerate it. And Miranda, I want Patricia Wells to understand that she can't hide from this. I want her name, her face, her actions known everywhere." By 6 a.m., the story had exploded across social media with the force of a bomb. News channels were running special segments. Flight attendant abuse was trending globally. Passenger videos were being shared, analyzed, debated. The public's reaction was swift and merciless. Thousands of comments demanding justice, calling for Patricia Wells's termination, expressing outrage at the airline's protocols. Dr. Mendez found David in the hospital cafeteria at 6:30 a.m., still in his wrinkled suit, now on his third cup of black coffee. She could see the exhaustion on his face, but more importantly, she could see the calculation behind his eyes, the look of a man who was strategizing, planning, orchestrating. "Mr. Chen, I wanted to give you an update on your children," she said carefully. "Both are stable. Both are showing good signs of recovery. The dehydration is being managed with IV fluids. We're monitoring them for any complications from the stress response, but I'm optimistic. They should be able to go home within 48 hours." "Thank you, doctor," David said, and there was genuine gratitude in his voice. But then his tone shifted, became more businesslike. "I'll need comprehensive medical documentation of their condition, the cause of their distress, and expert assessment of the long-term psychological impacts. My legal team will be contacting you." "Of course. We want to ensure those children receive justice," Dr. Mendez said, and something about her tone made David look at her more carefully. "You're angry too," he said, not as a question but as an observation. "I've been a pediatrician for 20 years, Dr. Mendez replied. "I've seen a lot of things that shouldn't happen to children, but what happened to your twins, that was deliberate cruelty. That was one adult deciding that her convenience mattered more than two children's basic human needs. Yes, I'm angry." David nodded slowly. "Good. That anger is justified, and I'm going to make sure everyone understands exactly why." By 8 a.m., the airline's corporate offices were in complete chaos. The CEO, Jonathan Masters, had seen the viral videos, read the trending hashtags, and understood immediately that this was a catastrophe of epic proportions. His phones were ringing constantly. News crews were gathering outside the headquarters. Attorneys from multiple law firms were calling with lawsuits already being prepared. But the call he dreaded most came at 8:15 a.m. It was from David Chen's legal team, officially notifying United Airlines that David Chen was pursuing legal action on multiple grounds: child endangerment, willful neglect, breach of the unaccompanied minor protection agreement, emotional distress, and a dozen other charges that could bankrupt a company or force massive settlements. The message was clear. David Chen was not interested in quiet settlements or corporate damage control. He wanted complete and total accountability. By 9 a.m., Patricia Wells was being contacted by airline management, instructed to come in for an immediate meeting. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She had no idea that a man with virtually unlimited resources had decided that her punishment would be swift, absolute, and inescapable. David sat in Jennifer's hospital room, watching his daughter sleep, and allowed himself a small, grim smile. He'd taken on hostile takeovers with less determination than what he was about to unleash on Patricia Wells and United Airlines. And unlike business, unlike markets, unlike negotiations, this was personal. This was his children. And accountability was coming. Patricia Wells had been a flight attendant for 33 years, and in all that time, she'd learned to read the atmosphere of an aircraft the way a sailor reads the ocean. But she had no idea how to read the atmosphere in the corporate conference room on the 23rd floor of United Airlines Denver headquarters at 10 a.m. on Wednesday morning. She'd been summoned without explanation, told only that there had been an incident on Flight 447 and that she needed to come in immediately for a meeting. Patricia had assumed it was routine, maybe a passenger complaint, maybe a procedural review. She'd had a few of those over the years. They were always tedious but ultimately meaningless. What she hadn't expected was to open the conference room door and find David Chen sitting at the head of a polished mahogany table, flanked by 3 attorneys in expensive suits, with a folder full of documents in front of him. The moment she saw him, something in her recognition system fired. She knew his face. She'd seen it somewhere, maybe on the news, maybe in a magazine she'd glanced at in an airport lounge. Whoever he was, he carried an unmistakable aura of power and control. "Patricia Wells," he said, not as a question but as a statement. His voice was perfectly calm, perfectly measured, perfectly terrifying. "Please sit down." Patricia sat, her hands beginning to shake slightly despite her effort to appear composed. "What is this about?" she asked, trying for indignation but landing somewhere closer to fear. David opened the folder with deliberate slowness. "This is about my children, Marcus and Jennifer Chen, who were on your flight yesterday. They are 8 years old. They were traveling as unaccompanied minors under the airline's protection program, and during your 6-hour flight, you subjected them to systematic neglect and psychological abuse." Patricia felt her face go pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. Those kids were fine. They just needed some discipline." "Stop talking," David said, his voice cutting through her like ice. "You're going to listen now. After you attempted to speak, you can leave this room, but that will not change what happens next." He slid the first document across the table. It was a video still from the aircraft camera system. Patricia's face twisted in anger as she leaned down toward Jennifer, clearly threatening her. Below it was a transcript of what she'd said, provided by multiple passenger witnesses. "Here you're threatening an 8-year-old child," David said, his voice remaining eerily calm. "Telling her she'll regret speaking to you. Let me show you what she actually did. She asked if you could explain the basic protocols for requesting assistance. That was her crime." He slid another document. This one was a medical report. Here are my daughter's medical records from Denver Children's Hospital. Severe dehydration, acute stress reaction, elevated cortisol levels consistent with prolonged trauma. The hospital's pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Mendez, has provided expert testimony that this condition was caused by your deliberate denial of water for over 5 hours. Another document. Here are passenger statements. 43 separate written statements from people who witnessed your treatment of my children. They describe you refusing water when requested, denying bathroom access, deliberately skipping their row during meal service, and making threatening statements. Patricia's hands were now trembling visibly. She opened her mouth to speak. I said stop talking, David said, and there was something in his tone that made her close her mouth immediately. You subjected my 8-year-old son to a panic attack so severe that he lost consciousness at 35,000 feet. You subjected my 8-year-old daughter to such severe stress that she experienced dissociative symptoms and collapsed. Both of them required emergency landing and hospital care. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. I'm David Chen. I built a company worth $40 billion through precision, research, and follow-through. I have applied those same skills to documenting every moment of your cruelty toward my children. Patricia felt tears beginning to flow down her face, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of dawning realization, the understanding that she'd made a catastrophic mistake, and that the person sitting across from her had the resources to ensure she paid for it. What do you want? She whispered. I want accountability, David said simply. Complete, total, absolute accountability. He turned to the attorney on his left, Richard Hutchins. Richard, what's our status? Lawsuit is being filed today on multiple grounds, Richard said, not looking at Patricia, speaking as if she weren't even in the room. Child endangerment, willful neglect, emotional distress, violation of the unaccompanied minor protection agreement, and civil battery for the threats made to the child. Damages being sought, $15 million. David turned to the attorney on his right. Miranda, what's the public status? His publicist pulled up her phone. The story has gone absolutely viral. 42 million views on the main video. Hashtags trending in 15 countries. News coverage on every major network. Patricia Wells's name, face, and actions are being discussed globally. Reddit has organized to identify her in. Stop, Patricia said, her voice breaking. Please stop. I didn't mean I was just. You were just what? David asked, his voice sharp as a blade. Just denying water to children, just refusing to allow bathroom access, just publicly humiliating them, just making threats against them. Which part of your behavior did you not mean? Patricia had no answer. There was no answer. What she'd done was deliberate. It had been a choice made repeatedly, hour after hour, to prioritize her comfort over children's basic human needs. David stood up. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation by the FAA. The airline is terminating your employment. You're being sued civilly and will likely face criminal charges for child endangerment. You will never work in aviation again. And every person you meet, every job you apply for, every interaction you have for the rest of your life will be colored by what you did to my children. He walked toward the door, then paused. Those 2 8-year-olds in Denver Children's Hospital, they trusted the system. They trusted you. They believed that adults would take care of them, and you proved them catastrophically wrong. I hope you can live with that. He left the room, followed by his attorneys, leaving Patricia Wells alone in the conference room with the documents of her own destruction. By 2 p.m. that same day, United Airlines held a press conference. The CEO, Jonathan Masters, announced Patricia Wells's immediate suspension pending termination. He apologized publicly to the Chen family. He announced a comprehensive review of unaccompanied minor protocols. He announced new training requirements, new oversight mechanisms, and new psychological evaluations for all flight crew. The damage control was too little, too late. Social media had already decided Patricia Wells's fate. Her Facebook profile had been flooded with thousands of comments, her images spread across every platform, her name permanently associated with child abuse. Former colleagues were giving statements to news outlets. People were protesting outside United Airlines offices in major cities. Patricia Wells had become, overnight, one of the most hated people on the internet. Offers of employment had evaporated. Friends had distanced themselves. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing with reporters and angry citizens. She couldn't go to a grocery store without being recognized and confronted. David Chen, sitting in his hotel room with Jennifer sleeping peacefully beside him, finally allowed himself to smile. 3 weeks later, Marcus and Jennifer sat in a bright, comfortable office filled with soft colors and the gentle sounds of a small fountain. The walls were decorated with children's artwork and inspirational quotes. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trauma-informed therapist specializing in child stress disorders, sat across from them with a warm smile and a collection of toys and art supplies at hand. "So Jennifer," Dr. Mitchell asked gently, "how are you feeling about flying again?" Jennifer considered the question seriously, her 8-year-old face thoughtful. "I'm still scared a little bit," she admitted. "But Daddy said we're going to practice, and that I get to choose what to do if anything feels wrong." "That's very smart," Dr. Mitchell said. "And Marcus, how about you?" Marcus, who had been quietly building something with blocks, glanced up. "I don't want to fly for a long time," he said honestly. "But I know now that what happened wasn't our fault, and there are good people, like the doctor at the hospital, and Grandma Ruth who helped Jennifer." Dr. Mitchell smiled. David Chen had spared no expense in securing the best trauma therapists in the country. He'd hired Dr. Sarah Mitchell at a premium rate to work with the twins 3 times a week. The twins were healing, slowly, carefully, but genuinely healing. They still had nightmares occasionally. They still experienced anxiety in enclosed spaces. But they were beginning to understand that what had happened to them was not a reflection of who they were, but rather a reflection of Patricia Wells's failures as an adult. Meanwhile, the legal and institutional fallout from the incident continued to ripple outward. Patricia Wells's termination from United Airlines had been finalized, and she'd become permanently unemployable in the aviation industry. 3 separate airlines had blacklisted her. Her name was synonymous with child abuse. She'd attempted to find work at a few other companies, but public outcry had forced them to rescind offers. She was pursuing anonymous work now, data entry, customer service, anything that didn't involve her name being visible. Her life had been systematically dismantled in exactly the way David Chen had promised. More importantly, the aviation industry was being fundamentally changed. The Chen Protection Protocol, as it was being called in industry publications, had been adopted by every major airline in North America and was being implemented internationally. The protocol included mandatory child protection training for all crew members, quarterly psychological evaluations for flight attendants to identify those unsuitable for working with vulnerable passengers, real-time monitoring and reporting systems for unaccompanied minors, direct communication channels between unaccompanied minors and pilot supervisors, and immediate intervention protocols for any staff member showing hostility toward vulnerable passengers. The FAA had launched a comprehensive investigation into Patricia Wells's conduct and had recommended sweeping changes to the unaccompanied minor program across all airlines. Congressional hearings were being scheduled. David had agreed to testify, bringing his children's story to the national stage. In the meantime, David had established the Marcus and Jennifer Chen Foundation for Child Safety in Transportation. He'd funded it with $50 million, an amount designed to create meaningful change across multiple transportation sectors. The foundation provided grants to airlines for improved training, funded research into trauma response in children, and created legal support for families experiencing mistreatment in transportation settings. At a prestigious hotel in Los Angeles, David held a press conference to announce the foundation. He stood at the podium with Marcus and Jennifer flanking him, not as props, but as individuals with their own agency. Jennifer, who had prepared remarks with her therapist, spoke first. "My name is Jennifer Chen," she said into the microphone, her young voice steady and clear. 3 weeks ago, I was on an airplane with my brother Marcus, and a flight attendant was very mean to us. She wouldn't give us water or food, and she said mean things, and it made us really sick. But good things happened too. There were people who helped us. And now my daddy is helping other people so that what happened to us doesn't happen to anybody else's brothers and sisters." When she finished, there was a moment of absolute silence in the conference room. Then the room erupted in applause. Journalists were crying. Even the most hardened news anchors had tears in their eyes. Marcus, more reserved and still struggling with the emotional aftermath, simply held his father's hand tightly. He wasn't ready to speak publicly yet, and everyone understood that. His presence was enough. David spoke next, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had learned something fundamental about his own power and privilege. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "What happened to my children happened because of a system failure and an individual's choice to prioritize her own comfort over children's basic human needs. But it also happened because I had the resources to ensure accountability. I had lawyers. I had a media platform. I had money. Most families don't have those things. Most families, when their children are mistreated, have nowhere to turn. This foundation exists to provide resources for those families. This foundation exists to ensure that every child, regardless of their family's wealth or status, is protected." The settlement from United Airlines had been finalized at $8.2 million. David had established the bulk of it in a trust fund for Marcus and Jennifer's education and future care. He donated a portion to the foundation, and the rest he directed to organizations working to prevent child abuse and support trauma survivors. By summer's end, the twins were beginning to approach something resembling normalcy. Their grandparents, waiting in New York, had finally gotten their 6 weeks with the children, though the grandparents acknowledged that the twins who arrived in July were different from the twins who had been supposed to arrive. They were more serious, more aware of danger, more protective of each other, but they were also resilient in ways that only children who have survived real trauma can be. On a warm August evening, David took both children to a private airfield in California. A small Cessna was waiting, the kind of aircraft used for recreational flights. The pilot, a woman named Captain Helen Rodriguez, was a veteran of 30 years who had volunteered specifically for this mission after hearing the twins' story. "Are we going to fly?" Marcus asked nervously, looking at the small aircraft. "We are," David said, "but we're going to do it very slowly. We're going to go up for just 10 minutes, and if at any point either of you wants to stop, we stop. Okay." They boarded together. Captain Rodriguez explained every step of the process: the pre-flight checks, the communication with air traffic control, the acceleration down the runway. She kept the twins engaged, let them see the instruments, made them feel part of the process rather than victims of it. When the small aircraft lifted off, Marcus gripped his father's hand tightly, but he didn't ask to go back down. He looked out the window at the landscape below, smaller now, less threatening from this perspective. Slowly, his grip relaxed. By the time they landed 10 minutes later, he was almost smiling. "That was different," Jennifer said thoughtfully. "That was okay." "That's because you had control," Captain Rodriguez explained. "You knew what was happening. You trusted the people around you. That's what makes flying safe." David understood that this simple lesson, about control, communication, and trust, was the real healing his children needed. Not to pretend the trauma hadn't happened, but to understand that they could move forward despite it. That evening, David sat with both children tucked under his arms, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus was already falling asleep, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. Jennifer was still awake, watching the colors change. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "are we going to be okay?" David kissed the top of her head. "We're going to be more than okay," he said. "We're going to be the kind of okay where we help make sure other kids get to be okay too. That's what the foundation is for. That's what telling our story is for." "Good," Jennifer said, and then she too closed her eyes. The darkness had passed. Justice had been served. Systemic change had been implemented. And a family, broken and traumatized, had found their way toward healing, not by forgetting what happened, but by transforming their suffering into purpose, their pain into protection for others, and their experience into lasting change that would protect vulnerable children for years to come.